Israel and the United Arab Emirates have agreed to normalize diplomatic relations. Now, the UAE is only the third Arab country to make such an agreement with the Jewish state, the other two being Egypt and Jordan. Charlie D'Agata digs into this agreement.
Well, this is a deal that's going to have huge ramifications across the region. The big loser is Iran. We were there in the UAE when Iran started attacking and seizing oil tankers, which they started to do again this week. The UAE has been an important U.S. ally with American forces based there. But the Gulf nation has had to tread carefully not to provoke Iran. That's clearly no longer the case when you take sides with Iran's sworn enemy. Now, it obviously benefits Israel in having another important and wealthy friend in the neighborhood. And finally, although the Palestinians say they've been betrayed by the UAE, the deal puts Israel's plan to annex parts of the West Bank on hold, at least for now. As both countries benefit from diplomatic ties, trade, and technology, there is a hope, anyway, that fellow Arab nations may follow suit. Anne-Marie?
So President Trump announced this landmark agreement in the Oval Office yesterday, and he gave an awful lot of credit to his son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner, for helping to broker this deal. Jared Kushner was on CBS this morning, and he talked about it.
What you saw yesterday was the first peace deal in the Middle East in the last 26 years. I've been working on this very closely with President Trump over the last 3.5 years. It took a lot to get to this point, but this is a dramatic breakthrough that will make the Middle East safer. It means that less American troops will have to be over there.
All right, so let us bring in Dan Raviv. Dan, this news broke yesterday, and you were able to get on the phone and all that sort of stuff. But now we have a chance to really dig a little deeper into it and see after we've gotten a chance to look at the details. So to start with, what exactly does this peace deal mean? And does it mean the same thing to everyone impacted by it?
Well, I suppose it never does, but it is good for both sides. Otherwise, why would the two nations, Israel and the United Arab Emirates, do this? Hey, keep in mind, by the way, they are small in terms of population. Both Israel and the UAE have less than 10 million people. So small countries feeling kind of embattled. Israel, of course, we know, surrounded by Arab countries, finding itself almost always at war, at least in a technical sense. But there was a peace treaty with Egypt in 1979, then with Jordan in 1994, often the product of secret diplomacy, and this time with the United States clearly helping one of those Persian Gulf countries, right? The United Arab Emirates has decided to recognize Israel, not just to do business in private and in secret. For Israel, it involves acceptance. You get a map of the region now. Of course, Israel, there it is, sort of toward the left. And look how far away the UAE is. And you know what's in the middle? Saudi Arabia. That would be the big enchilada, or the big falafel, if you will, in the Middle East, because Saudi Arabia is 34 million people and clearly a huge power. Saudi Arabia is not willing to make this leap. But the UAE feels itself very close to the U.S., very dependent on the U.S. It will benefit from Israeli intelligence, Israeli technology, for agriculture, for shipping. Israel benefits, as I say, from acceptance, from having an ally, certainly a friendly country, on the Gulf, looking straight across at Iran. It's really good for both countries, Anne-Marie.
That's really interesting. When we were talking earlier with our editorial team, one of our producers brought up the fact that Egypt and Jordan get a significant amount of aid from the U.S. And I was thinking about the UAE, and it's a pretty wealthy, small country. They wouldn't really need aid, I don't think. Is this
It's not a lack
really
of money,
about
it's connection. Yeah, it's security. It's feeling safer with Iran right across the Gulf. And, another country that's just to the south, Qatar, chose a different route. It actually hosts a lot of U.S. forces, but Qatar is also friendly with Iran. As a result, the Saudis and the UAE and Bahrain, they can't stand Qatar for being too friendly with Iran. And so, this is a very delicate game, but the UAE has definitely decided to be in the American camp, to work with President Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, before they potentially are voted out of office this November. A strategic decision by the UAE. And now there is reason to hope, as the White House says, that other Arab countries. We think probably little Bahrain, probably Oman, another small country. They've, by the way, cooperated with Israel in secret, but they may also establish diplomatic relations.
Oh, that is fascinating. And now we come to the Palestinians. Included in this deal is a halt to the annexation of some land in the West Bank. But the Palestinians are not happy with this.
Well, listen, they feel in general it's a betrayal by an Arab country. By the way, the UAE, the two big cities, lots of travelers know. The map of the Gulf will show that. We know Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Two big airlines fly there, Emirates and Etihad. And so it's an important business center. Now we're looking at Israel and the West Bank. Of course, the West Bank held by Israel since the Six-Day War of 1967. All of this territory is, of course, quite small. But, of course, it's been battled over for centuries. And the Palestinians always feel that they need to have their own independent state. But negotiations with Israel keep failing. Many, certainly President Trump, blame the Palestinians. Trump cut off aid to the Palestinians. And right now he's trying to force the Palestinians to come to the negotiating table. Yesterday, President Trump said that as a result of this, the UAE, and then if there are also other Arab countries recognizing Israel and operating, the Palestinians will realize that they must come to the bargaining table, even if so far the Trump so-called peace plan written by Jared Kushner offers the Palestinians only a very tiny and disjointed independent state. But so far the Palestinians say, we've been betrayed. We don't even want to talk.
We have also heard from Iran and Turkey. They are not in favor of this deal. They have condemned the deal. What is the impact of a deal like this within the region? You've talked about, the possibility of some other smaller nations now feeling more comfortable with brokering a similar deal. But what of those who are unhappy with it?
Well, you're talking about two that are kind of interesting. Very large Iran, which, of course, is known to have a secret nuclear program that President Obama wanted to stop in one way with a nuclear accord. And President Trump wants to stop with heavy sanctions, and he tore up the nuclear accord. Iran and Turkey, both of them are Muslim countries that are not Arab. Both of them would like to be the big player in the Middle East. And obviously right now it's really Israel that is benefiting. It's Israel that's stronger diplomatically. And so Turkey feels left out, has condemned this agreement in which the UAE recognizes Israel. Turkey is even threatening to cut off diplomatic relations with the United Arab Emirates. They've already had complaints and arguments about two things. Two civil wars in the Arab world, in Libya, in North Africa, and in Yemen, where the UAE is fighting pro-Iranian forces and Turkey takes the other side. So obviously this is incredibly complicated, but you have to say that what happened this week is good for the U.S. and its interests. And of course, that means Iran hates it. And Turkey, that wants to be the big power in the region, is unhappy. By the way, Turkish newspapers are recognizing kind of a good thing from their point of view, that Israel has shelved its idea of annexing parts of the disputed West Bank. No annexation on the table right now. That was a little bit difficult for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to do, but he's now saying, I'm a peacemaker. That's more important.
Dan, thank you so much. Sometimes understanding the region is like understanding three-dimensional chess, so we really appreciate having access to you and your insight. Thank you.
Sure thing.